Welcome to the Demeere podcast. We talk about martial arts, self-defense, and a whole lot more. And now your host, Demeere.
Hello everybody, welcome to episode 27 of the podcast, and I have some news for you, and then I'm going to do a Q&A on some of the questions that I got from Kane. But first of all, as always, I want to thank one of my patrons, Jacob Larsen from Denmark, who's been with me for quite a while now. I think Jacob became a patron pretty much in the beginning. So here's a shout out to you, Jacob, and thank you for your support. And as most of you know, Patreon is what allows me to make my podcast, my blog, and so on. So it's thanks to the support that you guys give me, guys like Jacob and everybody else, that I can do the stuff that I do. So huge shout out to you, special thanks. If you haven't joined us on Patreon, you're obviously welcome to do so. Go to patreon.com/Wim Demeere, my name, and then you'll see everything we've got on offer there. Lots of fun and games, so check it out. Now moving right along into the updates. First things first, I am happy to announce that my Basic Self-Defense Part 1 Controlling Techniques video is now available to purchase on Amazon Prime Video. So you can purchase it there, and I will obviously put a link to the direct page where you can get it on Amazon in the show notes. So it took a while because it was quite difficult to get everything sorted out on a technical front, but Amazon Prime Video is basically the streaming platform from Amazon.com, and that is a little bit trickier than other platforms to work with. For instance, one of the things is that it has English subtitles, so I had to work with a company to create those subtitles and a bunch of other stuff. But now all that stuff is sorted out, and the video is available now. So my goal is to go as wide as possible with my products, and that's why I wanted to have everything on Amazon as well when I make out new material. Obviously, if you do not have an Amazon account or you don't want one for whatever reason, I still have my Pivot Share channel. Again, I will put the link in the show notes. So that is a similar system where you can stream and download videos from my old Paladin catalog, but also the new one, the Basic Self-Defense one. So very happy to announce that. If you were holding out for the video to become available on Amazon, well, now's the time to go get it, enjoy, and obviously then we can move on to the next part, which is a question that I have for you guys. Do you guys want me to make instructional DVDs? So I'm not talking about streaming, I'm talking about the discs, the DVD discs. Obviously, with the now defunct Paladin Press, I have several instructional DVDs that I made available through them, but Paladin no longer exists, and obviously I now have the rights to do that myself. I can do this with Amazon. They do offer a program in which you can upload the files for your DVDs, and they will then publish them, and they will become available on Amazon.com and so on. But it takes quite a bit of work. It's not as easy as it sounds, and it would mean that I have to manually edit all these DVDs, and it's about, I think I've got about 14, 15 discs that I have to manually remake, so that's quite a bit of work. I'm not quite sure if there's interest in for this kind of thing anymore. It's 2018. Lots of people are into streaming, which obviously I'm the same. I prefer streaming over physical products, just a lot more practical. I don't know if there's a market for it. I've talked to this about this to other instructors, and I'm getting very conflicting answers. For some instructors, it worked great. For others, they said that pretty much nobody's interested anymore. So who knows? Hence my question to you guys. Would you like me to make all my instructional videos that I have from formerly with Paladin Press and all the future ones, would you like me to make that available on DVD? And that would be on Amazon, obviously. If you don't like it, if you're not interested, either way, let me know in the comments on Facebook, or if you go to the show notes for this episode, you go to wimsblog.com/27, the number 27. That will bring you to a page on my blog where you can leave a comment on this episode. Let me know there. I'm open to suggestions, so just let me know. Then moving on to the final update. As you guys know, I had the crossover podcast with Ian Abernethy. That was a huge amount of fun for me and for Ian as well. We talked about it afterwards via email a little bit more. And I've got a lot of positive feedback, and Ian was the same thing. Apparently, a lot of people enjoyed us just nerding out over martial arts and self-defense, which is exactly what we did. If you haven't listened to the episode, go to wimsblog.com/26, the number 26, and that will take you there, and you can listen to it. It was a fun episode, and the whole idea was that people could ask us questions, and we would answer them. So it was people who followed Ian gave him questions for me, and people who follow me on social media gave me questions for Ian, and we just discussed it. And like I said, us just being two big martial arts and self-defense nerds, just having fun talking about this kind of stuff. And like Ian put it, we gave everybody the opportunity to listen in on the conversation, but it's not like it was a hardship for us to do this kind of thing. So the good news is that Ian agreed to do a part 2 of the crossover podcast that we did. So he's a very busy man. He travels a lot. He's got a lot on his plate with his website, his podcast, his books and videos and so on. So it won't be this year, but we will probably be taking questions early January of next year, so 2019. So stay tuned for that. That will be obviously a lot of fun for us as well, but our goal is to try to give you guys a lot of practical information, and both coming from our slightly different perspectives, because Ian has mainly been training in Japanese martial arts, and I've mainly trained in Chinese martial arts. But we both have a very strong self-defense and practical approach as our focus. So that is something you guys have to look forward to, and me as well. And that immediately brings me to the main topic of this episode. Now, as I promised to everybody, is that if Ian and I didn't have time to cover all the questions that we did, I would eventually get to them myself, the ones that I received. And that's what I'm doing right now. So I got a question from Kane, and Kane sent me a message basically with 3 questions for the episode with Ian. So I'm going to cover them. Now, these are technique questions, which is very hard to do just by talking as opposed to showing somebody. But I will do my best to answer them because I like the questions and I think it's worthwhile exploring them a little bit. So here's the first question that Kane gave me, and it is, what are some good ways to defend against rushdowns or barrages of punches? In some street confrontations, an aggressor would suddenly and quickly run towards a target, then throw many hard punches wildly and relentlessly. The aggressor may also grab the target, for instance his collar, his hair and so on, with one hand, which keeps it at an effective striking distance and prevents the target from dodging, countering or escaping. Attacks like these look difficult to defend against because it would require a tremendous amount of reflex and mental preparation against being surprised and intimidated by the sudden rushdown. That's a good question. It is actually quite common, this kind of thing. So I think it's an interesting question for me to try to answer, which I will do. Now, anything I say now is going to boil down to the fact that you need to have enough time to react so you can pull off whatever technique I mention. If you don't have that time, you're going down, or you're going to take a lot of damage as the guy starts wailing on you. So keep that in mind with everything that I say hereafter, is that you need to have the time to react. If you are caught completely off guard by surprise, well, there's not much you can do but only cover up and try to get in the fight and or get away from the guy. But it's not starting out really well for you at that point. So many of the things that I will then give as possible solutions now will not be available. So once again, keep in mind that you need to have enough time to react and pull off a technique. Otherwise, whatever I say doesn't matter. And another point as a caveat is that there are always many factors involved to determine if a technique can work in a situation, because each situation is very specific and will have different variables. So I can only give you general advice about the possible solutions you might want to try, especially in your training, to see if they can work for you. So I won't go into specifics or say this is the best technique or this is the worst technique, because again, a podcast is not really a great venue to answer such technical questions. It's so much easier to just show it to somebody, which is why I will only stick to the general stuff. So that said, let's move on to the first option, and that's something that I like to do, and that is a sidestep. So just to get away from him, you see him coming and you take a step to the side, and if possible, you turn into him, meaning if he's coming straight at you from in front, because it's easier for you guys to imagine this. He's rushing straight at you from in front, step to the side, to your left side in this case, and then pivot towards your right. And if you can then use your arms or forearms or hands to deflect him or push him away from you, that would be even better. Now this takes quite a bit of training. It's not as easy to pull off as it might seem, but that is one effective way of defending you against somebody who's rushing in to try to get to you. The next possibility is advancing at an angle. So let's say he's at your 12 o'clock. So you then explode forward the moment you see him coming at you like that. You explode forward towards 10 or 11 o'clock or towards 1 or 2 o'clock. So that's at a slight angle. Now, one key point here is that you need to make sure you have a good cover for your head when you do that, because it's risky. If you make a mistake, he can nail you as you come forward, and it turns into pretty much a head-on collision. So you need to make sure that you don't take a lot of damage as you advance. The upside is that if you can make this work, then you are often in a good position to do something to him, and he is no longer in a good position to hurt you all that much. Now this is a moment frozen in time, obviously. What I mean with that is that if he rushes at you and you manage to, for instance, step towards your left towards 10 o'clock, that is going to radically change the situations for him in an instant, because you're standing in front of him and all of a sudden you're standing to his side, or even you might have made it to his back. So then you have a tactical advantage which will not last forever. So you have to make use of it. So with everything I say here as well, I can talk about all the different solutions that I might offer for you for your training to experiment with, but they are never absolute in the sense that, well, just do this and then you're done. No, the only thing we're looking at right now is what is the first thing that you should do when somebody tries to throw that barrage of punches at you. You obviously have to follow up with techniques depending on what you're good at, and depending on what you like, and also depending on the context. That could be striking him, punching, kicking, whatever. It could also be that you just push him over so he falls and you run away. Or it could be that you enter into some sort of grappling situation where you want to throw him or trip him to the ground and control him there. Or it could be that you either can, because you're good at it, or in another situation because you have to, you try to slap a joint lock on him, an arm bar or wrist control, whatever works for you. So there's always going to be a follow-up on anything that I say here, which I'm not going to discuss because that, again, would take us too far into the weeds and we would be off on huge tangents to even make sense on a podcast. Again, showing so much easier. So that was it. Going at an angle, then moving on to the next possible solution. It's one I like to do a lot, and I explained that in my Combat Sancho video in the first one, and it's what I call the L steps, or the letter L from Lauren. This is default technique for me, meaning that every time that you're in a scenario where you have something happening to you, you default to it. Now, I wouldn't say it's the perfect solution, but it's one I think you can trust. You have to practice, but it's one I think it's more often the right one as opposed to the wrong one. Now, in that scenario, that means that you're getting rushed and you instinctively start stepping backwards. This is very common. As soon as people see somebody rushing at them, they just take a step back. The idea of the L step is that every time you take more than 2 steps back, you have to take 1 to the side. Left or right is less important than the fact that you do so. So you train to stop yourself after taking 2 steps backward from taking another one, because that is where most people tend to make a mistake. Then they tend to lose balance and they fall. Now, if you are trained, especially if you are trained, you should be able to take 2 quick steps backwards while staying in balance. But typically, and you can try this, you can practice this, try to do that and it works, and then try to do 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 quick steps backwards and still use your balance. You'll find that it's a lot more difficult, especially if you've got a guy coming at you trying to just land this barrage of punches on your head. So that is why I'd like to train this footwork pattern in which I take 2 steps back and then immediately followed to 1 to either side. So this stops me from developing too much momentum that can be used against me and make me end up in a really bad position. And then the trigger is that each time you take a second step, you know that you have to stop doing that and you go to the side. At the same time, what this achieves is that you are no longer standing right in front of him. And that is always a good thing to do if you've got somebody charging at you. If you start instinctively by stepping back, it's good because it increases the distance between you, but it's still bad because you are still right in front of him. If you can change that to a step to the side, then he has to adjust, which he may or may not be able to do in time. And then that opens up everything that you have as far as your own weapons that you can use against him, meaning punching, kicking, and so on. So that is the L step. Now, all these different kinds of footwork that I mentioned, it takes training. You shouldn't expect to just be able to pull it off if you think about it. You have to practice this kind of stuff. So bear that in mind with all the previous techniques that I mentioned. Moving on to another one, there's a very effective option that I like, and it is to crash into him on purpose. So he comes at you and he wants to throw that barrage of punches, and you just step forward and into him as you cover up and close the distance. Because if that happens, he cannot effectively strike you if he expects you to be at, for instance, the range for a big haymaker, and you suddenly step into him where he can't even land that punch. So you're stepping into the arc of the punch in this case. The idea is to get into clinch range or really in tight so you can take him down before he can land a bunch of blows that knock you out. Obviously, there is risk involved because you are likely to take some damage on the way in if you miscalculate or if Murphy's Law happens and something goes wrong. So at the very least, you have to be in some sort of guard position where you bring your elbows up, or you cover up your head, or you present the point of your elbow as you slam into him, something that you can hide behind or use as cover as you try to close the distance and basically enter into a head-on collision. Now, there is some danger. However, there's once again an upside, and the upside is that you force him to switch into a more defensive mindset. Now, he's coming at you hard, he's aggressive. So he is in the mindset of taking you down and doing damage. If, as he tries to do that, all of a sudden you step very aggressively forward into him, and I like to lead with elbows. So with for my patrons in the monthly technique that I do, we covered that a little bit in one of the entries that I like to do on getting into somebody's face as they come at you. And I showed a bunch of different entries, so I will put some links in the show notes for that. So you force your opponent, when you do that, in a more defensive mindset. He can't just get away with just attacking you however he likes, because all of a sudden you're slamming into him, and that tends to mess up people's technique a lot, and also allows you once again to follow up with whatever you need to do then. Now, I want to caution you that doing this against somebody who is much heavier than you is not very smart. If there's a big weight difference, crashing into him is a lot harder. And if you make a mistake in judging the distance, or your technique's a little bit off, he can just grab you and pull you over, or you both end up on the ground. And ending up on the ground with a heavier opponent is far from ideal. So again, this is something you need to practice so you know how you can do this. And a way to practice this is have somebody hold a big kicking shield very tightly against their stomach and chest, and then just at first slowly and then build up the intensity, they eventually charge at you and you just ram it. It's not as easy as it sounds, like I said, and there's quite a bit of impact for you as well. So again, don't overdo this, practice this bit by bit and see if it can work for you. These are some of the options that I like. Again, remember, if you have the time to pull them off, if you are completely surprised, it's not going to happen. Which brings us to the next part. What if you can't evade that charge? That guy is just coming at you, he's throwing one punch after the other and you didn't have time to get out of the way or do something else. So then the main goal should be to not take damage or to stop taking additional damage if you got a first shot in. So I am fond of a covering reflex, again, that I showed in basic self-defense. And the goal there is to cover up and protect your head mainly with your arms and elbows primarily. There's several possible applications and techniques you can use for that, but it's a good starting point to stop taking damage and protect yourself when you are surprised, when you get sucker punched and so on. So that's the first thing that I would advise. Second thing is, if you can, try to make space. Try to get some distance between you both, but very often that's not possible. Because if he's coming at you hard, he's chasing you down. He's likely to keep on going forward until something stops him, and that also means that he has a speed advantage, so he's got momentum on his side. That means that it's very difficult for you to go backwards quickly and stay in balance if you've got a guy charging at you and his punches are powered with the momentum of his forward-moving body. Even if they aren't very technical, there's a lot of energy in those punches. And as you're quickly backpedaling, you've got a high risk of tripping and falling and so on over any objects or whatever's lying there. So you don't want to end up down in a vulnerable position. But if at all possible, he gets the first shot in, you're covering up and so on, try to make space. You can push him off you can pivot, you can grab and try to throw him away from you. If you can get a punch in and that can mess up his structure, that would be great as well. But again, at this point, you're really behind the curve, and he's got the tactical advantage, so it's not going to be very easy. Again, you'll notice that this is something that comes up often when I talk about techniques, is that there's a lot of caveats, there's a lot of yes, but, or if, and so on. So it depends on a variety of factors there's too many of them to list them all. So a lot of it is just trying to get to general advice that you can use, and then you have to go out and train and try and see if you can make it work in training at first, and hopefully you'll never need it then. But whatever I say, it's useless if you don't practice. So that's it, Kane. That's for the first question. I'm going to move on to the second one, and that is, what are some effective ways to defend against tackles? Now, it's very common in a self-defense situation that somebody tries to stick you down, and what is very common as a scenario is that two guys are fighting, they're punching at each other, somebody leans away and the other one tries to hit him and he falls forward and they crash into each other, or one guy is taking damage and in a desperation move he shoots in with whatever sloppy tackle that he has, and he tries to take the fight to the ground instinctively. The true tackle is a variation of that idea. The problem is that it works even if the person isn't well trained. It doesn't have to be a technically perfect tackle. It could be something that, like you see in football or in rugby, where you see guys just charging at each other and try to get each other down. And that kind of stuff will do the job just as well as, for instance, somebody doing a double or single leg takedown from wrestling. What it takes is that your attacker needs to develop a lot of momentum by charging at you explosively, and then he uses that momentum so his entire body mass slams into you as he's trying to grab a hold of you, your arm, leg, body, or whatever. Now, the main strategy against that is avoidance. Once again, this implies that you see the tackle coming and that you have the time to react. If neither of these conditions are met, then, well, you're most likely to, going down to the ground with him, or alone. That would be even worse. So there's no guarantee here. There are no foolproof techniques against everything, because there are too many variables and something can always go wrong. But at the very least, try to be aware of the distance that he is at. Make sure that you are not surprised because you weren't paying attention. So that is the first thing. Try to avoid getting taken down, obviously. And paying attention to distance between you and everybody else, especially when somebody's getting aggressive or angry. That's good advice regardless of whatever of the attack that he uses, a tackle or something else. So that's the first point. Then the second one is that if you have the time, one of the safest ways that I think to defend against is once again sidestepping or angling off. So a tackle is a straightforward rush. Somebody's going straight at you and he's not going to stop. So he's not going to just come at you and then slow down a bit so he can punch you a few times in the face. He's going to keep coming forward. He needs to drive that momentum into you and keep going to tackle you. But if you're quick enough or maybe he's too obvious about it, then angling off and pivoting and sidestepping, they are very much viable options. Angling off, sidestepping I covered before. Take a step to the side and pivot and try to get him off you. And then pivoting is basically taking a step to the side and then trying to drag a circle with your other foot. So let's say that I've got my left foot forward and I am facing my opponent. I take a small step to the left with my left foot, and then I pivot with my right foot and draw an arc, so to speak, on the floor with my right foot. So that's pretty much what you're doing in a pivot, and it's a circular movement. That means that your upper body will also circle and rotate, which means that you can then also use your hands, your forearms, your elbows, and so on to not only assist in deflecting him off you, but also keep him in your sights. So that means that your body turns as he goes past you. Now, again, pivoting is a little bit tricky. It's not as easy as it sounds, but again, if you can pull it off, it can work quite well. Moving on to the next technique, what I also like to do is as he comes in for the takedown, and I'm maybe not completely late, but I am a little bit late. I like to push down on his head or the back of his neck as I try to step off the side or get away from him in whatever way possible. This tends to slow the attacker down a little bit and also pushes him away from you, or you can push yourself away from him if he's a pretty strong guy. So that is one I like. It's, again, something you need to practice, because doing this against a slow incoming attack you can see coming is not that hard. But when somebody's going from 0 to 100 in a fraction of a second, so to speak, it's quite different. Quite different and difficult as opposed to just in regular training. So practice this one slowly at first, and then obviously you have to speed it up to the point where you've got a partner standing a little bit away from you, and then he's just suddenly going to charge in and try to tackle you to the ground, and you have to defend against it. Obviously, be careful. Don't hurt your partner. You want to stay friends for a little bit longer so you both can train. So keep that in mind. Now, one point, I do not like to sprawl for self-defense. Sprawl is a typical defense against a takedown. I do not like to use that when somebody rushes at me, because you go to the ground by default when you do a sprawl. You're basically dropping down and flattening out your body so that you can weigh down on the guy trying to do that tackle or that takedown on you. Now, I always like to avoid going to the ground when it comes to self-defense, because a lot of bad things happen there. And long story short, I've talked about this too many times already, so I'm not going to rehash that. But going to the ground in self-defense is a very risky thing. And a sprawl inherently puts you in a position where you go to the ground. So I prefer the previous techniques. So that's it for the second question, and I'm going to quickly answer the third one that Kane asked, and that is, what are some ways to defend against a shirt flip? In some struggles and physical altercations, when people end up grappling each other, one of them will flip the other person's shirt or jacket all the way up to the head, and then they can tackle the guy. Obviously, this severely limits the other person's movement and vision, which is a very disadvantageous position to be in. I totally agree. I'm going to quickly give an overview of that one. First things first, the problem isn't the shirt. The problem is what he can do now without you seeing it coming. So you need to focus on the threat first. Don't just let him go and try to get the shirt down, because he's going to punch you in the face. You won't see it coming. He will take you down, whatever. You can't just say like, okay, pause. Let's pause this game here while I get ready to fight again. It doesn't work like that. So it's risky to immediately try to yank that shirt down, even though that might be your first instinct. I would suggest try to keep a hold of the guy, or get a hold if you don't have one. But if he's close enough to pull that shirt over you, you should be close enough to clinch with him and grab him. So try to keep a hold of him, because even if you don't have visual contact, you have tactile feedback, and a lot of grappling relies on that. I would say the vast majority of grappling is tactile feedback and not visual cues. Now, as you do that, drop a level. You've lost your vision, so it's easy to get disoriented. Okay, lower your center of gravity to avoid tripping or falling. Because if you fall, he succeeds in getting a really advantageous position over you, and that's where bad things once again will happen. For instance, when he starts stomping you. So drop a level and stabilize your position so you can work, as opposed to immediately be a little bit discombobulated and not know quite well where you are, how far you are to the ground, what direction you're going, and so on, and then you end up falling. Moving on to the next point, I like to manipulate the head and neck. Now, you can do that without the need for visual information, again, if you have tactile feedback, and it will severely limit his offensive capabilities. So you grab his face, you grab, and you rotate, twist it, crank it, and so on. So you put pressure on the cervical spine as well. You can get him, peel him off you. You can even get him to the ground if you like. But at the very least, it's going to be difficult for him to just punch you and attack you if you are basically messing up his face and his neck as he tries to do that. So that is one of my go-to moves actually in this situation. Now, as you do that, or if you can't get to the head and neck, regardless from whatever clinching position you are, try to break his balance. If you can get him to the ground without following him, this can buy you maybe a second or two to get the shirt down. It's still risky, but if you can get him to the ground, he just fell to the ground. Maybe they even take a step back and quickly try to regain your vision again by pulling your shirt down. So these are some of the options that I like to use in this scenario. Now, remember, you are in a bad spot. If he can pull off that move against you, there are no guaranteed techniques that will solve this 100% of the time. He has a really significant advantage. There's a good chance that you're not going to win this fight. So when this happens, you have to make a mental shift and go into high gear. Because in self-defense, we know where it starts, but we never know where it ends. So your life actually might be on the line. If he pulls, for instance, a knife on you, you won't see it coming. So whenever somebody takes your vision like that, you have to crank it up a notch if you weren't paying attention right so far, or you thought you could manage by doing relatively low-key stuff. Your life is about to get a whole lot worse. So treat this as a very dangerous situation and act accordingly. And then practically speaking, I would suggest the following. This is one of the main things that I like to do in this situation, and it's an integral part of my class when I teach. So practice grappling with your eyes closed. You don't have to blindfold yourself. You can if you like, but start by just closing them and practice that way. This will help you get accustomed to not freaking out when all of a sudden you can't see, and getting used to using tactile feedback effectively in any grappling situation. And then afterwards, put your shirt over your own head and grapple then, and work from there. Just start with the bad position and work your way through different possibilities and how it feels and how you can control the guy, and then maybe spin him around and then quickly pull the shirt down, or whatever you want to practice. But just put yourself in that situation and see what happens, and see what you can make work, see what your partner can make work, and so on. And try to problem solve it yourselves with the techniques that you know how to do well. You start with low-level stuff with the training, and then you ramp up the intensity bit by bit, as always. And then eventually, you want to get to the part where you do scenario training with your partners, again, always safely, but try to get to a point where your partner can pull off that technique when you don't expect it. And then you'll see if the training sticks. So that's it, Kane. I hope these are good answers for you. I want to thank you for the questions. Everybody else, I hope you enjoyed it just as much and you find some use for it in your own training. And I am going to call it on this episode then. So thank you all for listening. As always, the show notes will be at wimsblog.com/27, number 27, and you will find links to the stuff that I mentioned. You can, if you want to support the podcast, my blog, and all my work, go to Patreon, patreon.com/Wim Demeere, and then join us there. And as always, like, share, subscribe, and give me a shout out on social media if you like, and enjoy everything else that we still have to come. So thank you very much, and I will talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Wim Demeere podcast. For more information, go to www.wimsblog.com.